The kitchen tiles were cold. Colder than they should have been for a spring morning. My knees hit the floor first, followed by the ceramic mug that slipped from my hand and shattered in a chorus of sharp, bitter clinks. A dark pool of coffee spread around me like a slow, creeping shadow. I lay there, breath shallow, heart skipping unevenly, staring at the underside of the cabinets and waiting, for something, for someone. But no one came. There was no startled gasp from the hallway, no footsteps rushing down the stairs. No knock on the kitchen door. The silence settled in, thick and suffocating, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant, cheerful chirp of birds outside a window no one opened anymore. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe more. Long enough for the coolness of the tiles to seep into my skin, long enough for the ache in my shoulder to remind me that 66 years weighs differently when you're alone on a kitchen floor. Eventually, I pulled myself upright, gripping the counter edge with trembling fingers, ignoring the sting in my wrist. I told myself it was just low blood sugar. Or a dizzy spell. Or maybe my body getting used to being ignored. But I knew better. That was the moment it hit me. If I'd died right then and there, no one would have noticed for hours. Maybe longer. Not Jacob, my son. Not Katie, my daughter-in-law. Not even the grandkids playing video games upstairs. I could have turned to dust under that kitchen table, and they would have stepped around me like they do my opinion at dinner. It wasn't just the fall that shook me. It was what came after. Nothing. I had become a shadow in my own home. My name is Marilyn Stewart. I used to be a nurse, a good one, by most accounts. For nearly 30 years, I worked in hospitals across New Jersey. I held the hands of mothers in labor, whispered comfort to dying men, cradled infants taking their first breaths. I wasn't just a nurse. I was a witness to beginnings and endings. I mattered. At least, I used to. After Greg passed, I thought this house, our house, would be the place I could find peace. He and I picked the tiles together, planted dogwoods in the front yard, painted the porch railing every other year even when it didn't need it. It was our haven. Our promise to grow old in the warmth we built. Then Jacob asked to move in. It made sense. His family needed space, and I had plenty of it. The idea of laughter filling the rooms again, of tiny feet pitter-pattering through the halls, of being surrounded by life, it sounded beautiful. Like a second chance. For a while, it was. But like spring fading into summer, the warmth turned into something else. Something stifling. Something quiet and cruel. It started with clutter. Baby toys on the couch. Sippy cups in the sink. Boxes piled where my reading nook used to be. Then came the comments. Mom, maybe don't rearrange the fridge, we have a system now. Or, it's easier if you don't use the stove around 5, that's when Katie preps the kids' meals. I didn't argue. I wanted to be helpful. I didn't realize I was slowly being folded out of the daily rhythm like a napkin no longer needed at the table. The nail in the coffin was the chair. Dinner was once a family affair, with laughter and clattering silverware and warm casseroles. Then the table grew crowded. 5 chairs were always filled. The 6th, the one I used to sit in, was quietly removed, folded and placed in the laundry room. No one said anything. No one had to. That night, I heated up soup at 8 and ate alone in the breakfast nook, listening to my family's muffled laughter through the walls. I didn't cry. Not that night. Instead, I went for a walk. The sidewalk was cracked in places, but the evening air was cool. A dog barked 3 houses down. A woman in a floral robe nodded politely. A boy on a scooter zoomed by and said, "Hi, lady." Like I was just another part of the scenery. And strangely, it was the kindest greeting I'd had all week. I began walking every night. It became my escape. My way of saying, I still exist. At home, no one asked about my day. No one wondered where I went. But on the sidewalk, I could at least wave to someone and feel like I hadn't completely disappeared. One night, after a particularly isolating dinner, I pulled a leather notebook from Greg's old drawer. It was a gift he'd once given me with a note inside that read, "For your thoughts, because they're beautiful, just like you." I hadn't touched it in years. On the first page, I wrote, Marilyn Stewart. Nurse. Mother. Wife. Human. I wasn't sure why I needed to remind myself. But I did. Every night after that, I wrote something else. A memory. A dream. A name. Something to tether me back to who I was. Because piece by piece, I could feel myself fading into a ghost in the house I built with love. And then one morning, I collapsed. And no one came. The morning after the fall, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My skin looked pale, thinner somehow. There was a faint bruise along my jaw where I'd hit the floor, and my eyes, once so bright and full of knowing, looked tired. Not just tired. Absent. I turned on the tap and let the water run, pretending the rushing sound could drown out the ache in my chest. No one had noticed the bruise. No one had asked why I'd skipped dinner. Jacob had walked past me 3 times that day, phone in hand, earbuds in, oblivious. Katie had shouted up the stairs for the kids to brush their teeth, then stepped right past me while putting laundry away. I had become a hallway fixture, like the coat rack, but easier to ignore. That evening, I sat on the porch for hours. The dogwoods Greg and I planted were starting to bloom, their white blossoms soft against the dusk. I used to love spring. Now, even the scent of the petals felt like a mockery. Life was returning all around me, but I felt further from it than ever. I brought the notebook with me. Flipping past pages of old thoughts and fading memories, I landed on a blank one and stared. For a long time, I didn't write anything. Just sat. Listening to the wind move through branches, the far-off murmur of a neighbor's television. Eventually, I wrote one sentence. I am not a guest in this house. But even as I underlined the words, I didn't believe them. It had been 5 years since Greg passed. In that time, I had shifted slowly, invisibly, from homeowner to houseguest, from matriarch to inconvenience. What made it worse wasn't their cruelty, it was their indifference. Cruelty, at least, comes with acknowledgement. But being invisible, that erodes you. The following week, something changed. It wasn't big. Just a glance. A quiet realization. I had returned home from my evening walk to find Katie laughing in the kitchen with her friends. She looked younger than I remembered. Energized. The kids were upstairs watching TV. Music was playing softly. My home, our home, felt like a space I didn't belong to anymore. A curated world I had been gently, persistently pushed out of. I stood at the entryway for a full minute. No one turned. So I walked upstairs. Into the master bedroom. My bedroom. And I sat down on the bed Greg and I once shared. The lamp beside the bed was still his choice, brass, slightly dented, with a pull chain that clicked softly. I reached over, clicked it on, and stared at the closet. Half of it was now filled with storage bins Jacob had shoved in there 2 months ago. And in that moment, I realized, I hadn't lost my space. I'd given it away. Piece by piece. With every, "It's okay," and "Don't worry about it," I had allowed myself to disappear. But not anymore. That night, I went down to the basement. I hadn't been there in months. Dust hung in the air like old memories, and the shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten things. I opened a filing cabinet and rifled through folders until I found what I was looking for. The deed. Greg and I had signed it together, 15 years ago. Our names, his in sharp, engineer handwriting, mine in nurse's scrawl, etched side by side on the page. I held it in my hands like a lifeline. This was my home. My name. My signature. My right. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His office smelled like lemon disinfectant and paperwork. He was young, polite, and slightly surprised when I handed him the deed. "I just want to know what my rights are," I said, voice calm. He looked over the document, adjusted his glasses, and smiled. "Well, Mrs. Stewart," he said, "you're the sole owner. That means you can make decisions about who lives in your home, set boundaries, even, if necessary, pursue legal eviction." I nodded. "Do you want to do that?" he asked gently. "I want to be seen," I replied. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, he added, "Then let's help you make sure you are." For the next few days, I didn't say anything to Jacob or Katie. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I simply began preparing. I moved my things back into the master bedroom. Took down the bins. Replaced the sheets with the ones Greg and I used to keep for spring. Hung the wind chimes again outside the kitchen window. I printed copies of the deed and the letter from the lawyer affirming my ownership. And then, one Saturday afternoon, I laid the papers on the dining table, right in the center, surrounded by their untouched dinner plates. When they came downstairs and saw them, there was confusion at first. Then silence. Jacob picked up the deed, brows furrowed. "What's this?" "My house," I said simply. Katie blinked. "Wait, what?" I looked at them both. My voice didn't shake. "You've been living here under my roof for 2 years. I've asked for respect, not control. And instead, I've been erased. This isn't a fight. This is clarity." Jacob's face turned red. Are you kicking us out?" I shook my head. "I'm reclaiming my life. You'll have 60 days to make other arrangements. You'll get a formal letter. But this isn't about anger. It's about dignity." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. He just stood there, holding the paper, while Katie stared at the floor. I went back to the porch. The sun was beginning to set. The wind chimes sang softly in the breeze. And for the first time in years, the house felt still. Still, and mine. The 60 days passed like the slow unfolding of spring, tense, inevitable, and strangely quiet. No shouting. No dramatic confrontations. Just a subtle shift, like the house itself was exhaling for the first time in years. Jacob and Katie avoided me, mostly. I wasn't surprised. I think part of them never believed I'd follow through. Perhaps they thought it was an empty threat, or that guilt would eventually reel me back in. But I didn't waver. I cooked my meals. I read on the porch. I tended the dogwoods. I occupied my space with quiet certainty. And the house began to change with me. The hallway grew wider. The air felt less heavy. Even the silence shifted, from suffocating to soothing. One afternoon, as I was repotting my herbs on the windowsill, I overheard Jacob on the phone in the backyard. His voice was low, frustrated. "She says we have to leave," he muttered. "No, she's serious this time. I thought she'd cool off, but she got legal papers and everything. Yeah, she's even using the main bedroom again." I didn't listen further. I didn't need to. They were making arrangements. There were moments when I questioned myself, late at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above. Was I being cruel? Was I pushing away the only family I had left? But then I'd remember the bruise on my jaw. The way they stepped over me when I collapsed. The invisible dinners. The folded chair. This wasn't punishment. It was self-rescue. I wasn't banishing them. I was choosing me. The final week arrived. I found myself preparing the house like I had before guests arrived, not with dread, but with reverence. I dusted the mantel Greg had built. I polished the frames of our old photographs. I replaced the dim light bulbs, washed the curtains, and aired out every room. And then, they left. They packed up their SUV slowly. No hugs. No tearful goodbyes. Katie kept her sunglasses on, even indoors. Jacob gave a half-hearted, "We'll be in touch," which I knew was just code for, "We don't know how to face you right now." That was okay. I didn't need closure. I needed space. The SUV pulled out of the driveway and turned the corner. And then, silence. The real kind. Not the kind that isolates you. The kind that blankets a place in peace. I walked through the now emptied rooms. Their furniture was gone. The kids' toys, the cluttered bins, the sound of doors slamming and voices arguing, all gone. For the first time in years, I could hear the house again. Its creaks. Its warmth. Its breath. I sat on the living room rug and cried, not out of sadness, but out of release. The tears came like rain on dry earth, watering something that had been dormant in me for too long. Grief. Grief for what I'd lost. Grief for the woman I'd stopped being. But mixed in with something else. Power. That night, I made my favorite dinner, baked salmon with lemon and rosemary. I opened a bottle of wine Greg had saved for some special day. I lit a candle, sat at the center of the table, my table, and toasted to no one but myself. To the return, I whispered. In the days that followed, I reclaimed everything. The garden bloomed again. I replanted the flower beds, added new color, trimmed back the neglect. My walks turned longer. Neighbors started to stop and chat. One even said, "You're glowing, Marilyn." I smiled, not out of politeness, but because it was true. One morning, I called the local library and asked if they needed volunteers. They did. I began spending Tuesday afternoons reading to children, and Thursday mornings helping at the front desk. The staff were kind, the air smelled like paper and learning, and for the first time in a long while, I felt useful. On Saturdays, I started hosting porch coffees. Just a few neighbors at first. Then more. Word spread. People came by to sit on the steps, share stories, sip tea, and laugh. The same porch where I once sat invisible was now a space of connection. One evening, I pulled out my notebook, the leather one. It felt heavier now, thicker with memories and truths. I flipped to the last page and wrote. I am not a guest in my life. I am the author. And for the first time since Greg's funeral, I felt him there. Not as a ghost. Not as grief. But as a quiet approval in the wind. The letter arrived on a warm afternoon in late May. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, torn along the side, folded twice. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, structured, trying too hard not to feel. Mom, I know we didn't leave on good terms. I don't know what to say except, you were right. I didn't see it before. I'm sorry. I hope you're doing okay. Jacob. I read it twice, then once more, slower. There were no grand revelations in it, no tear-stained apologies or heartfelt memories. But the fact that it existed at all meant something. It meant the silence had cracked. The walls we'd built, walls of neglect, pride, and distance, had started to crumble. Not from shouting or force, but from space. From truth. I folded the letter and placed it between the pages of my notebook. Not to hold on to pain, but to honor progress. The house, meanwhile, had begun to sing. It wasn't the sound of people filling the halls like it once had been. No, this was a quieter kind of song. The ticking of the kitchen clock. The wind chimes over the sink. My slippers padding across the tile. The kettle's whistle. These were the sounds of a woman returned to herself. There were still echoes, of course. Some mornings I'd pour an extra cup of coffee out of habit. Or I'd hear a child's voice on the sidewalk and think of my grandkids. But the ache had softened. The absence no longer hollowed me out, it gave shape to the space I was learning to fill with intention. One afternoon, while digging in the garden, I uncovered a tiny metal car, one of my grandson's old toys. It had rusted from the rain and dirt, but I held it for a moment, brushing the earth from its sides. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just smiled and placed it gently on the garden ledge, letting it sit in the sun. Some memories don't need to be buried or erased. They just need to rest where they belong. As weeks passed, the community began to wrap itself around me in small, kind ways. The librarian gave me a key to open early. The postman lingered a bit longer for morning chats. A group of older women invited me to join their walking circle on Wednesdays. I said yes. On the first Wednesday walk, one of them, Nancy, soft-spoken with a mischievous smile, asked me how I'd come to live alone. I didn't, I said, chuckling. I just finally remembered I already lived here. She laughed, not quite understanding, but nodded anyway. And I realized then that my story wasn't about loneliness. It was about return. Not just to a house, but to voice. To identity. To the quiet, steady power of reclaiming something that never should have been lost. Months later, I stood in front of a mirror, the same one that had once reflected a stranger. Now, I saw my gray curls tied neatly back. My eyes weren't tired anymore. They were clear. My chin had that familiar little stubborn tilt Greg used to tease me about. And I smiled. Not a weak smile. A full one. A smile of someone who had collapsed, and risen. Later that summer, I hosted a small gathering, a garden brunch under the shade of the dogwoods. Just friends, neighbors, the library staff. Someone brought a guitar. Another made too many scones. It was simple. Joyful. Whole. We sat on lawn chairs and told stories. One woman turned to me and said, "You know, Marilyn, your home has a spirit to it. It just feels safe." I looked around at the blooms, at the wind moving through the leaves. "It is," I said. "It finally is." That night, as dusk folded gently over the neighborhood, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, the notebook open in my lap. The last page was still blank. I thought about what to write. I tapped the pen against the paper for a while. Then, slowly, I wrote. When silence breaks, a voice returns. When we stop waiting to be seen, we finally remember how to stand. I closed the notebook, leaned back in my chair, and listened, not for footsteps, or apologies, or permission, but for the breeze through the dogwoods. For the song of a home that had found its heart again. And this time, it was singing for me.